So, we got to talk about this. Candace Owens is putting forth a documentary attacking the Black Lives Matter organization. And, well, she can tell it better than I can. So just take a listen here.
Black Lives Matter released their 990 IRS filings. They collected $80 million. Where is that money?
It's not here. Everything looks worse than it was.
Where have you seen that money impacted throughout the city? So my producer just sent me a link.
A film by Candace Owens.
Because of how much money was raised to think that where he lived, the bills weren't being covered.
Okay, you get the gist of it. So I think we can all admit that the actual organization, Black Lives Matter, the 501c3, or however it's organized for tax purposes, there have been some questions, some inquiries, some questionable spending that's been admitted even by the leaders of that organization. And that will work itself out. There will be legal turns, I'm sure, court investigations, federal investigations, state investigations into how money is being spent. Obviously, they're reporting the data, which is how Candace Owens is able to find out this information, because they have reported and filed paperwork. And so I'm going to leave that aside. The issue I'm having, though, is the conflating that Candace Owens does, and now Kanye West, Ye, however you want to call this new name, wearing their White Lives Matter shirt in Paris, to the point that Kanye made to protest what he saw as Black Lives Matter being fraudulent or not being real. That's a whole nother conversation we can have in another video. But the problem is the conflating of the two. Black Lives Matter, the 501c3 organization, versus Black Lives Matter, the slogan, the spiritual-led movement that resulted after many killings, murders of innocent black men and people of color at the hands of law enforcement. And the conflating tends to happen a lot with people on the right. Candace Owens is one of the biggest sort of persons in this rate. But here's another example: is they do the same thing with things like CRT and teaching of Black history, whereas CRT is a method of analyzing situations that occurs in law school. It's a legal analysis. It's a model. It's a prism. Another way of analyzing law and its effect on people and higher education. CRT is not taught in schools. What is taught in schools is Black history. What is taught in schools is women's history. What is taught in elementary K through 12 schools are the history of indigenous populations and Latinx communities and the like. And that is completely different, but it's conflated to make a point. And so we have to question the motives of people like Candace and others on the right who seek to do those kinds of things. But to the point that she is reckoning or trying to have a reckoning with the Black Lives Matter movement, the question that I'm curious about and would love to talk about is, as we talk about Black Lives Matter, not the organization, but talking about Black Lives Matter as a rallying cry to push back against disproportionate use of force by law enforcement, tax-paid law enforcement, against people of color, primarily African-American males and females. As we look at that, the question becomes, at least in my mind's eye, to look at the greater view of violence and what I call intra-community violence, not black-on-black violence. We all know that whites kill the same proportion of whites as black kill other blacks. It's about proximity. It's about neighborhoods, about where you live, more than it is about race. But the question does remain and does come out that can we honestly talk about Black Lives Mattering unless we talk about all Black Lives Mattering? And while I understand that there are two different causes, two different sets of causes for Black Lives Matter violence in terms of law enforcement and, again, laws on the books that allow that behavior things that don't allow police officers to be charged and civilly, and the protections that they have as officers, and the blue code of silence. All that aside, what's really destabilizing our communities is the violence that we perpetrate against each other every single day. And so while I support firmly Black Lives Matter in terms of fighting and resisting and changing the laws of this country as it affects law enforcement and their relationship with people of color, I'm concerned about violence that hits everyone in our community. And those numbers of us against us is far greater and provides a more existential threat in the immediacy than the other type of violence. And I think we can walk and chew gum at the same time. We can fight against one, and we can actually provide solutions for the other at the same time, not be mutually exclusive, and actually solve the problems in our community. And I say this because as a city councilman in Newark, I can remember senior citizens as people were fighting for police reforms. I was one of those leaders that fought to try to get a consent decree to come from the Attorney General's office at the federal level into Newark to stop police brutality and abuse that had been alleged by citizens, that had been alleged even amongst Black cops in terms of progressive discipline within the Newark Police Department. I stood firmly in that. But the calls I got to my office were from senior citizens talking about the crime where they lived, that they were unable to go to the drugstore without having to walk through packs of young Black men on the corners, and councilman, can you just do something to disperse of this? And parents worried about their children who were not gang affiliated being able to navigate bus stops and going to school without getting involved in fights and in disagreements and arguments they had nothing to do with. That was a very real and daily occurrence. And so the reality is that if we're talking about violence, we need to be talking about all the violence in our communities, particularly within our intra communities that we have against each other. And I'm not the first one to talk about these kinds of issues. Many leaders in our community have talked about it for years. Jesse Jackson was famous for saying about 10 years ago, 15 years ago, that when he walks down the street now, he doesn't fear, the biggest fear he has is the young Black male walking behind him. And so I want us to focus not on the things that Candace Owens does and others on the right who are seeking to profit and have motives that I think we can question, and questioning the organization of Black Lives Matter. I want to expand what we mean by Black Lives Matter as a rallying cry to save our communities and make that all Black Lives Matter. And there are a few things I think we can do to really talk about ending these issues within our communities that have really been generational, that are tied to poverty, tied to opportunity. But far too often, we're not looking inside ourselves and the resources we bring to bear as members of fraternities and sororities, members of other social and fraternal organizations, people who work in nonprofits and those kind of things. And so when we talk about what are some of the answers and ways that we stop this genocide, that we stop the crime, that we lower it, one idea I think we have to get to is actually concentrating all of our resources where the problem actually is. There was a recent study that came out in Newark, New Jersey that talked about 80% of the city, 20% of the city is where most of the crime happens. Violent crime and property crimes. And so it seems to me that if 20% of a particular area is where most of the crime is actually happening, then everything needs to be brought to bear in that particular community. Nonprofits, government, job creation, small business development, mental health services, medicine. All those things need to be concentrated with the population that has experienced generational poverty, generational mental health crisis, generational trauma, and those types of things, educationally and otherwise. Those things need to be brought to bear on that population at a level never seen before. And I think it's probably the same. If it's the same way, if it's 20% in Newark, I'm sure it's a 20% sector in Detroit and Boston and Baltimore and some other places that are around the country where we're experiencing this kind of crime. And so concentrating all of our efforts on that population, I think will go a long way to actually rooting out the causes of why we are where we are. The second thing I think we have to talk about is where our people live in order to have a job that doesn't involve the underground economy to provide for their children. And that might mean actually moving. And why do I say that? Well, it's very difficult to find a job that pays a living wage to support a family of two in big urban communities where you don't have a lot of industry. Automation has taken a lot of jobs that used to attract folks. And my grandparents came up from the South, from South Carolina, because there were good factory jobs in places like Newark and other places, in Detroit and in Los Angeles. And you saw the great Southern exodus and migration as a result of that. Those kind of jobs don't exist anymore. And so not only does one person have to work in the household, two people have to work. Kids have to get part-time jobs just to make ends meet. But what's happening is that those jobs don't exist in the big cities, but they do exist in places like South Dakota and Idaho. I was at a conference in DC a few years ago, and I was talking to a gentleman at an educational conference, and he said, "So what are you doing here?" He goes, "I'm here to try and get people to come to my state. We have tons of jobs that are available, and we don't have enough of a working base, a working class, to take those jobs." And so if you have a CDL license and drive trucks, if you have customer service skills, if you have other skills that you can bear, it might be financially beneficial to go to another part of the country, to realize job opportunities and other opportunities in other places where your dollar will go longer, will go farther, and you can actually create a new dynamic for your family and change the arc that your family and trajectories your family may have been on that may have been dysfunctional. And so I think we need to be having policies and encouraging people to go to these places to really have a new start and to break some of the psychologies and some of the other issues that are holding families back. And I think lastly, one of the other things that we need to talk about is our moral foundation as a people. And the reality is that whether you are subscribing to a particular set of values when it comes to religion, Christianity, Islam, what have you, what has always been the strength of our community has been a background and a foundation of faith that we can rely on, that gave us direction, that gave us discipline, that gave us structure, not only as a church or as a synagogue or as a temple or a mosque, but it gave our families places to go. It gave us, again, direction for the future. And what you saw were whole families, husbands and wives, or two mommies and two daddies in today's world, but creating family structures that are the best to raise kids. Success rates for kids who have both parents in the household are high by every sense of polling and every sense of research and data that is concentrated on this particular effort and this particular issue. And so we need to be going back to the things we know have sustained us since slavery, go back to the things that have sustained us before people came over as voluntary immigrants, and get back to those foundational values and principles that keep our community safe, that keep us protecting our women, that keep us protecting our children, that keep us developing businesses and things that serve us coming from that particular base. I'm proud to be a member of a church that actually provides social services for not only the folks in the church who are members, but for the outside community. There are lots of hubs of churches doing that, but we need more of that. You know, whether you agree with his politics or not, Louis Farrakhan and the Nation of Islam has been a forefront of cleaning up the black man in America, of creating stores, of creating an economy and jobs and businesses and buying farmland and putting forth a model of cleanliness, of not having drugs, not smoking, not drinking, wearing suits and ties, keeping your hair cut. Now, some people may think that that's old-fashioned, that's some kind of thing out of the 50s. But the reality is that if it worked before, it can continue to work and should continue to work. We can go about these whole fantasies and all these discussions about Black Lives Matter and whether the organization is legitimate or whether it's not. But one thing that we can't disagree about is that Black lives are important and are under assault by some of the institutions in America. Indeed, it has been since we were brought over to this country in 1619. And to deny that really denies a thorough understanding of the history of this country. And before we can really say that, white lives matter, white lives can't matter until Black lives matter. But the caveat I want us to concentrate on is the thinking that Black lives matter cannot mean what Black lives matter really should mean until all Black lives matter. And until we start talking in that jurisdiction, start talking with that authority, start talking with thoughts about problem solving and solution making regarding that, then we're really just dancing around and playing. Thanks for listening. Make sure you like and you subscribe. We're going to keep doing this. We're building this as we fly, but I think you're going to have some more good discussions. I look forward to hearing from you as we go forward. Take care.